LC of MHRD, College, Delhi University on research methodology, as it is the technique used to identify, select, process, and analyze the information about a research topic.
A gentle reminder to all participants, kindly turn off your video and mute your audio throughout the session. Participants, please ensure that your video should be turned off and you should mute your microphone.
Jia, continue ചെയ്തോളൂ. Jia?
She is mute actually.
Okay.
Yes, muted her.
So, let's begin this session by inviting Mr. Sanosh Tamban, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Mathoma College, Chungatra, for the welcome address.
A very warm good afternoon to all. I'm extremely delighted to welcome Professor Dr. M.S. John sir, who is here to handle the first session. And we are indeed very lucky to have such an eminent resource person to handle the very first session itself. Dr. M.S. John sir is a professor in the Department of International Relations and Politics, Central University of Kerala. He has held many key positions in his academic career. Let me name a few of them. He had served as the head of the Department of International Relations and Dean of the School of Global Studies and Director of Research of the Central University of Kerala. Before joining the Central University, he was the director of the School of Gandhian Thoughts and Development Studies, Mahatma Gandhi University. He was also a professor of development studies at IIT Madras. He had also served as honorary director of Dr. Paulos Mar Grigorios Chair and coordinator of the UGC SAP DRS and director of research of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He has 35 years of teaching experience to his credit. And Dr. John sir has published 8 books and 88 research articles in highly rated national and international journals. He is the recipient of many prestigious awards such as Commonwealth Scholarship offered by Bradford University, UK, Commonwealth Fellowship awarded by Lancaster University, UK, UGC Research Award and the Fulbright Visiting Professorship awarded by Eastern Mennonite University, USA. And he will be dealing a session on the topic Journey to Truth, an Introduction to Research. We heartily welcome you, sir. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our respected principal, Dr. Rajiv Dama sir, to this session. And I also welcome all the delegates to this session. Hope this session would benefit you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your warm welcome. Now, it is our most awaited session. It is our great pleasure to invite our resource person, Professor M.S. John, former head, Department of International Relations and former Dean of School of Global Studies, Central University of Kerala. And he was also a professor in IIT Madras, Director of Gandhian Studies Department, MG University, and Gandhi Luthili Chair for Peace Studies at South African University, who has also been the editor of Gandhi Mark, the quarterly research journal of Gandhi Peace Foundation, New Delhi. So, let's welcome sir to talk on the topic, the journey to truth, introduction to research.
Sir, please.
Good afternoon to everyone. Dr. Rajiv, the principal of Mathoma College, Chungatra, other colleagues and my dear friends. Well, a session on research methodology, particularly in the afternoon, can be quite a harrowing experience. But I hope to make it maybe an interactive kind of session so that you won't go to sleep. because after presentation, I would like to give you sufficient time to raise questions. Not that I will be able to answer all of them, but then generating questions itself is, one of the ways of trying to make us reflect on certain challenges that we experience in research. But there are certain areas where nobody can provide answers, and sometimes you may have to improvise certain strategies. And I personally, I have guided several students at their doctoral level, and then many of them have encountered problems. Sometimes we have to use certain novel, but at the same time, not unethical methods to gather data. So let's make it as interactive as possible. I'll start by saying that higher education institutions are not only, which includes universities as well as colleges, they are all institutions where existing knowledge is not just disseminated, but new knowledge is also produced. So production of new knowledge is one of the functions of higher educational institutions. Now, this is done through research. So research is intended to produce new knowledge. So this knowledge production should not stop at any point in time. Instead, it is a kind of cumulative process, and it should go on continuously, building on the existing knowledge. Right. Research is, like in any other kind of exercise. I'll start with I won't define it, but I would say that what research is defined as the creation of new knowledge. And not only the creation of new knowledge, sometimes you may be able to apply existing knowledge in new ways. That is also a contribution to knowledge. Or, for example, people who have done research, they have come up with a number of theories, but then by connecting some of these theories and identifying their similarities, and you may be able to, contribute to the field. So that will allow other researchers to, make sense of theories in a much better way. So let's not assume that generation of new knowledge amounts to something like a new discovery or a eureka as in sciences. Very often the new knowledge that you're speaking of is just a small extension of this knowledge. Now, even though it's a small extension, it is new. And as I said earlier, this is a cumulative process. And some people may be able to make substantially big strides in research and extend the field of knowledge in a significant way. But others also can contribute to this process of knowledge production in their own fashion, maybe by making certain small steps in this direction. So this could include also, synthesizing existing theories and ideas, analyzing previous research to the extent that this previous research becomes much more systematic and understandable to others. So if I build a taxonomy of theories, which is not there, and then I'm the first person to categorize different theories in a very meaningful fashion, that's my contribution. Okay, I may do theoretical kind of research, and then after reading extensive theories, I may identify their similarities and differences and group them and categorize them. So this is one contribution that people make. So that also qualifies as new knowledge. Now, I must say that it is research which propels humanity forward, makes us progress as years go by. And this is generated through what is known as curiosity. Why do certain things behave in a particular way? Curiosity about natural phenomena, about social phenomena, everything that goes around us. We become curious. Why do people behave in a particular way? Why do certain things happen in nature? So it is this curiosity which actually motivates us to explore a particular theme further. So we get curious and then we ask questions and then immerse ourselves in trying to discover everything there is to know about what we actually want to find out. So therefore, learning or attempting to generate knowledge is a kind of creative process, and it is thriving. Now, if early civilization, for example, hadn't been curious about what was going on, maybe the dark sky or all that, then we would not have come to this level of knowledge about the space and all the mechanisms that make up our solar system and all that. So decades and hundreds of years of research, they have led to where we are today at the moment. Okay, so we claim ourselves to be a civilized society, and a substantial part of what we have achieved is attributed to the results emerging from research. But of course, earlier research was not very systematic, but then the type of research that we do now is very systematic. So a civilized society actually moves forward with knowledge and various tools for generating this knowledge. Now, without research, we would not have even perhaps survived this far. You imagine, for example, because of the research in medical sciences, the kind of vaccines and so on that we have invented, we human beings are able to come to this far. Our longevity has increased. Several diseases which would have killed millions of people have either disappeared or been brought under control, or made less mortal, less severe in form, and so on and so forth. Research actually challenges you in many new ways. And in the universities and colleges, a research project gives you an opportunity to work closely with a mentor. We usually call him as a guide or supervisor, or other experienced researchers, to learn from their experience and also learn about the area in which they are focusing, and also help identify a topic on which you would like to do your research. Now, research takes place also, these days we talk about undergraduate research. Some research takes place at the master's level. And then, of course, MPhil is discontinued. And a substantial piece of research actually takes place at the PhD level. Once you have done your PhD, PhD is a measuring rod to find out whether you are capable of doing research all by yourself, independently. Okay, so once you have completed your PhD, you have qualified to do research independently. So that's the a kind of standard that you have attained. That's why when at the postdoctoral level, you may have a mentor, but then most of the postdoctoral work is carried out by the researcher himself or herself. Now, research or knowledge production is also a sign of a nation's power and economic growth, economic strength, and so on and so forth. Which means that more powerful countries produce more knowledge. Say, for example, most of our textbooks are written by the scholars from the West, primarily from the US. And US is a powerhouse as far as knowledge production is concerned. When we revise our syllabi, and when we try to redesign our curriculum, we always, look at how the curriculum is organized in Western countries. So there's a connection between knowledge and power. the more powerful, the more rich countries, they produce more knowledge. They are able to invest, heavily in knowledge production, in research and development, and also sanction projects which motivate people to do research. Now China is actually trying to come up in a big way, and the Chinese, the government has given a kind of free hand to universities to bridge the gap. They may not be able to bridge the gap immediately because of language problems and so on, and particularly in social sciences and so on, China is lagging behind. But the pace with which they are actually trying to bridge the gap is phenomenal, and that's one of the reasons why I think almost 24 Chinese universities have got into the first 500 universities list, global list, whereas we are still struggling to get any one of our universities into it. We have not succeeded in that. Of course, the non-university structures like the IITs, some IITs and the IISc in Bangalore, they have succeeded in gaining entry into the first 500, but then the universities are still way behind. As I said, knowledge in our current society era of globalization, or as you would call it, is knowledge is power. And that's one of the reasons why in many Western countries, they are allowing migration of highly skilled people, highly educated people, skilled migration. Because once they have the necessary human resource and the facilities are already there, once they can draw the best human resource from across the world, I mean, correspondingly, the power of the country and its manufacturing capacity and its overall human capacity will increase. This is based on that kind of a calculation. Now, in realizing all these difficulties of these problems, India has also embarked on this new education policy, which we actually unveiled last year, in 2020. We have one problem that we have is that we have made a segregation between teaching and research. And that's also reflected in the NAAC criteria also. From the universities, they expect more research, whereas from colleges, they expect less research. So this segregation of teaching and research is probably expected to go if the new education policy is implemented. So in the universities also, you will start 4-year undergraduate programs, and the colleges also will become, sufficiently autonomous so as to grant degrees all by themselves. So in such a scenario, with the disappearance of the affiliating system, it is hoped that research becomes a part and parcel of the teaching learning environment. So therefore, what happens in many of our universities, as well as in colleges, is that you may have graduated, but then you will not be able to claim credit for having published maybe at least a good article in a refereed research journal. So this scenario is hoped to, at least the Education Ministry hopes that this scenario will change with the introduction of 4-year undergraduate programs, in which the 4th year will be focused primarily on research, not doctoral level standards, but then standards appropriate to the undergraduate level. So it is, so in other words, this principle of catch them young, which means try to introduce research elements into the undergraduate curriculum and initiate the BA, BSc, BCom students to research at the end of their program in the last 2 semesters also. Well, most research in India actually takes place in specialized research institutes. By specialized research institutes, I mean scientific institutes established by the Government of India, science institutes where research degrees are awarded, but then they don't offer any undergraduate programs like the IISc. Then social science institutes where PhD is carried out, and hardly any one of them offer programs of study like masters and so on. We have, of course, exceptions in Kerala. We have the Center for Developing Studies in Trivandrum, which offers an MA degree in economics. But most other ICSSR institutions do not offer master's level programs. They have research programs, and they affiliate their research programs with either state universities or central universities, as the case may be. So most of this research takes place in these specialized research institutions. The Center for Developing Studies, maybe in the Madras School of Economics, the Madras Institute of Development Studies, coming to Bangalore, places like Institute for Social and Economic Change. So these kind of institutions, because the teachers are, the faculty members are paid their salaries primarily to do research, and they do very little teaching, teaching which is involved in the doctoral level for coursework and so on. But for the most part, they don't do teaching, instead focus on research. So it's these institutions which actually produce more research articles than universities. And only about roughly 20% of the fund which is given to CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, goes for social science research. It's actually less than even that. And then we also have a scenario where there was absolutely not much multidisciplinary orientation, no interdisciplinary kind of courses, and so that's also going to be bridged if the new education policy, if it is going to be implemented. I also want to bring to your attention a few more things, like say, for example, in sciences, you form what is known as research groups. Now, research groups means a number of people working in a single laboratory, or a number of people with similar interests working in several laboratories across not only across the country, but sometimes across the world. And somebody doing one part of research and then dividing it, the analysis take place in some other place where sophisticated equipment is there. So in this way, most of the science research articles are multi-authored articles. There are several authors. Unfortunately, this is a good trend. Actually, this reduces the burden of many individual scholars, but then it doesn't reduce the quality of the publication that emerges from this joint effort. So co-authoring. Now, this is something which is yet to pick up in many social science disciplines. To some extent, co-authoring has been taken on board by management sciences and commerce, and I also believe psychology. In a few cases, also social work. But barring these subjects, in economics, the situation is a little better. But then if you look at disciplines like political science and sociology and history and so on, the research that is carried out is all by the author himself or herself. This co-authoring system is it has not actually become popular. So co-authoring is something which is lacking, particularly in social sciences. And there is also a tendency within India to focus more on publication of book chapters rather than articles in refereed journals. Very often we make there is a confusion between referred journal and refereed journal. People sometimes write it. Sometimes even the UGC guidelines, sometimes they talk about, it's actually a spelling error, but then the clerk who typed it actually doesn't know what is the meaning of refereed. So just wrote it as a referred journal. And we have sometimes faculty members also saying this referred journal, of course, taking their cue from the UGC guidelines. Actually, there's nothing like a referred journal, but this is known as peer-reviewed or a refereed journal. So instead of publishing articles in refereed journals, when you publish articles in refereed journal, there will always be one referee. In good journals, there will be 3 referees, and some international journals, sometimes even more than 3 referees will be there. So, so once it is, unlike books, which do not have a refereeing system as rigorous as in journals, if you insist that you publish in journals, that's the way forward. And it is globally recognized as the norm compared to book chapters and, other things. You know that when research is, when you complete your research, and then the first place where you publish your research is in a journal, not in a book or in a book through a book chapter. So it is the journal which carries the results of your research first. And then subsequently you build on this research article, and then maybe after a couple of years you bring out a book if you intend to do it. Many of them may not intend to do that. So, but then the research is communicated through a journal articles. So journal articles carry the latest information. So that's why sometimes these days when you revise syllabi and all that, you include journal articles, latest journal articles in the reading list. That's one way of telling other people that your syllabus is also updated. I mean, taking into consideration even recent research. So one problem again is, sometimes the university administration is not very research friendly, and there is also a lack of incentives for those people who do research. I was just surprised, by the fact that sometimes promotions are given, and then the UGC says that you need to have some publications and all that. So universities always try to, get around these rules and say that instead of publications, if you have some experience in NSS or in NCC or some extracurricular activities, and you have guided the students and so on, that would be sufficient. Okay, so the lack of incentives is one problem, in the sense that if you publish, then you need to get some kind of recognition for that. Of course, recognition you receive for good publications, you get recognition in the form of citations. Citations, other people citing your research. Okay, citing your research. If you get good citations, that shows that your research had an impact on society, okay, on the knowledge world, right? Okay, I just want to give you some statistics. It's not the latest statistics, but then it's not very old also. The total grant given to the Indian Council of Social Science Research was 2.3% of what was given to the CSIR. So you can see the quantum. Earlier I mentioned a figure which is not right. Just 2.3% of the total grant given to science research. Okay, social science research is, not provided with sufficient funds. And then if you look at the way in which the ICSSR spends this money, this 2.3% of the the quantum given to CSIR, you'll see that 80% of this money goes for administrative expenses, for paying the salaries of the ICSSR staff, and maybe for building the ICSR libraries and upkeeping the regional offices and all that. And only 20% goes for funding research projects and providing scholarships to students and so on and so forth. Okay. So this actually, talks about the, pitiable nature of social science research in our country. Same is the case with the UGC. UGC allocates funds to universities and colleges through various schemes like the RUSA and so on. Many colleges, I understand, received funds under RUSA. But then if you examine to what extent these funds were used for research, I think hardly any funds were used for research-related purposes. Most of them were used for infrastructural needs, for strengthening infrastructure. Same is the case with the UGC funds given to the universities. So this is because, very often you don't get disaggregated statistics, how much, of money was spent for administration and how much for research. And interestingly, since we completed the NAC SSR, we know there's one place where the NAC people ask, how much of money was set apart for research? Of the total amount, how much was given, focused on research? Or the institution, does it give some small grants or something like that to the faculty members as part of promotion of, research? So this is one area where we actually need to, go further forward. Now, why should you actually think about conducting research? It has its own joys and gains. First of all, you gain some hands-on kind of experience completing a research, or research is a creative process. And then once you complete your research, and then once you are able to publish it, you have done something creatively. Okay. And then you get an opportunity to work with a faculty mentor or a research supervisor. And that would also give you an opportunity to connect with other people, the friends of this faculty member doing similar kind of research, and other people who are interested in similar kind of research. And then this faculty member may ask you to, this teacher, supervisor may ask you to attend conferences where you can meet people with similar interests and build networks and all that. So that's one advantage, going for conferences, making presentations there, meeting people, broadening your email contacts, and discussing, joining academic forums and discussing academic matters, sharing your articles with other people, because once you share them, you are actually making your article available for maybe citation if they are doing their research in the same area. And you also get academic credit for that. You can get scholarships. You can avail scholarships for research like JRF and all that. Then you can also hone your leadership and teamwork skills, your ability to work with other people. Now, this is particularly true of sciences, and in social sciences also. I mean, once co-authorship and then many people working on the same kind of topic and then engaging in co-publishing. Now that requires teamwork. So with a research degree, I mean, you are able to improve your CV, and that's and also learn valuable skills for life, such as being a kind of professional, developing your professionalism. Maybe also certain other skills like time management, for example, managing time. For example, you have maybe 3 years for your research. Many people who manage their time well and spend their period, I mean, in a very organized way, they will be able to complete their research in 3 years' time. For example, for a year or so, it may be difficult, but then once you have finalized your topic and you're prepared your questionnaire, and then if it is an empirical kind of study, then you should be able to, if you allocate your time in a very efficient manner, you should be able to complete it in time. But then sometimes you take up very difficult topics and you may have to visit certain dangerous places, or there could be some environmental hazards which prevent you from going there. Now, on such occasions, it will be difficult to complete in time. It may take longer time. In the sciences, if you're lucky, you may be able to complete it in 3 years, but then your research is experimental, so the experiments may not, give you the kind of results that you expect. But then even if you get your negative results, that also is a contribution, so that you can, say that there is no relation and between these, or no reaction takes place when certain things are combined and so on. So it is also, so not only time management, but also help you to do, some kind of multitasking, do more than one thing at a time. Okay. So I want to tell you that in the past, when we were research students, it was difficult, particularly in social sciences, it was difficult for us to collect data, particularly library sources. I did my PhD in international relations, and sitting in Kerala and then doing research on international relations can be a very daunting exercise. So I made a visit to Delhi, spent 3 months exploring all the libraries in New Delhi. So within those 3 months, spending several hours in the library and all that, and at that time, photostat facilities and reprographic facilities, they had not developed. So we had to literally either get somebody to type certain things down or take down those things all by ourselves. And then if you miss the references properly and all that, it would be difficult for us to retrieve these references. So now things have changed. And at that time, there was a huge knowledge gap between the rich industrialized countries and the poor countries. The rich countries had all the resources, but poor countries didn't have any resource, particularly library resources. So I remember whenever we were thinking of writing an article and then sending it to a good journal for publication, we were diffident. We didn't have the confidence because we were afraid that some of the contemporary developments about which we are not aware of, because these are not available in our libraries, would not be consulted, and then the person who reads it would say that what is the state of knowledge that these people have? They have very poor knowledge of the existing literature. So that confidence, lack of confidence, I think was a major deterrent for research during those stages, and that has disappeared. So this is one advantage that the present generation has. The knowledge gap has actually disappeared. Through the UGC's various e-learning platforms, we can actually access several journals which were inconceivable some 20 years ago. So if you don't do research with all these facilities in place, then I think people can blame you, unlike in the past. Okay. So this is one, and research also allows you, once you have written up, done your research, you need to write down your findings. You need to write down your review of literature, your methodology, everything. So that gives you an opportunity to improve your written skills, particularly academic language. Academic language has its own terminology. Your conversational, sometimes people think that people speak well. Their communication, prima facie, it may appear to be okay, and then you will think that they would write well. This is something that I've also seen as a supervisor, that sometimes people hardly talk, and you think that their knowledge of English is poor, but they write well. but they are not good in conversational English. And you also have the other way around. People speak English well, but they write poorly, full of errors, not just grammatical errors, including spelling mistakes. So, honing your essential language skills, particularly writing in an academic language. Now, this is one of the advantages of doing research. So, you'll communicate your ideas in an effective manner. Analyze the works of others and also criticize the works of others. And not destructive criticism, but constructive criticism of the work of others. You also gain a deeper understanding of the scientific process, and you would also, gain some capability to develop a research question, develop a hypothesis. If it is empirical research, you go with the hypothesis. If it is non-empirical kind of research, including language research and all that, you start with the research question. And as I said earlier, when you publish and get recognized by others, that's almost like like a baby being born, and you can look upon it with the pride, with a certain sense of pride. So it has a lot of plus points. It's also an excellent way to develop, as I said earlier, relationships with people and build networks. And research is needed in all areas, including even businesses and all that, because market research, for example, is one of the mechanisms that industries use to develop products as well as to gauge the level of demand for a particular product. So research, therefore, is essential in every segment, and it is one way by which we try to expand the horizon of knowledge. Now, every field of research has its own research problems and its own specific methods, but then we are referring to certain common methods here. But there is a kind of general agreement that what you say about a particular phenomena should be said in a manner so as to convince others that this qualifies as knowledge. So knowledge is not everything that you say, but certain things that you say in a manner after following a particular procedure, which is acknowledged by the scientific community as the norm. Say, for example, the doctors, they have their own, professional norms, and anyone who violates this professional norm is expelled from the community of doctors. The IMA and so on is there. Similarly, in research also, knowledge production has to be accompanied by the adoption of certain procedures. You may cheat. You may adopt these procedures and then you may cheat. In sciences, one advantage is that everything that you do should be replicable, which means other people are in a position to repeat the same experiments and see whether similar results are achieved or not. But in social sciences, it is not, replicable. You cannot repeat it to the same extent as in sciences. Certain other factors may have come into play, and then the behavior of people may change, the ideas of people may change. So of late, I have been, hearing news about many journals retracting research articles already published. Now, there's one way by which, they are saying that what you have done is nothing but forgery. Okay, you have cheated, and your research is therefore not valid, and then we are withdrawing it. So this retraction is, one reason why retraction takes place is because the necessary ethical procedures involved in research have not been adhered to by the researcher. So every research, how do you distinguish research from other pieces of writing? Other pieces of writing, like say a journalist going and reporting about certain events. Now he or she is basing himself or herself on a very limited knowledge and having a very short time frame in their view. Okay, so they would be saying certain things, and some of them may be a little more analytical, and some of them may use sometimes even certain statistics, including some graphs and all that will be there. But still it won't qualify as research. It won't be sufficiently rigorous because it would be impressionistic. Now, the impressions of the journalists are important. The journalists may have looked at certain facts and may have excluded certain other facts. So that's something which a researcher tries to capture. Researcher tries to capture and then tries to have a bigger picture of the event, a historical picture of the event, so that the previous incidents and other things are brought into the picture, and also try to look into the future. So this is the concern of a branch of knowledge as known as epistemology, or the science of knowledge. How do you know that the knowledge that you have acquired meets the necessary standards accepted by the knowledge world, that it is true knowledge, or whether it lacks description as true knowledge or not. So this is the question of epistemology. How do you know that what you know is what is really true knowledge? Now, there are certain terms which are commonly understood in research. One is the term theory. We talk about theoretical research, people who do not go to the field, but who actually sit in the library, read materials, read theories, try to analyze theories. In the sciences, people who sit in front of computers, look at theory, and those who do work, they primarily rely on computers, and high-end computers, mind you, because they require very powerful computers. So this is desk-based research. In languages also, a substantial part of it is desk-based, unless people go out and then meet, in literature, it's entirely desk-based. In languages, sometimes you may go out, meet people, and if you intend to study certain slangs of people as part of your study, then you have to do a kind of survey and all that. But otherwise, it is largely desk-based. So these they are theoretical kind of studies, within which normative studies also come, like philosophy, questions of what is right in a particular circumstance, and discussion about that, what is wrong and what is right and all that. Norms, this is what you say, normative. Okay, then empirical, based on observations, what you see. And empirical sciences, you have physics, chemistry. Most of the researches carried out are of an empirical nature. In social sciences also, the surveys and all that you conduct, these are all empirical research. There are also certain other terms, like a term called nomothetic, which means that which can be generalized for the whole population. So when you are trying to come up with generalizations which are valid across a whole population, maybe across Kerala or across India or something like that, you would say that this is a kind of nomothetic research. I mean, it's intended to end up with nomothetic results, as opposed to idiographic research. Here, you don't try to generalize for the whole population. Instead, you would say that this research findings are valid in this particular context, but no attempt is being made to generalize for the entire population, for the universe as a whole. Okay, so that's another term. And then all generalizations in social sciences, again, are not certain generalizations. Say, for example, we talk about the law of falling bodies. If you drop an object, it falls to the ground. It's because of the gravitational pull of the earth. If you do it today and then if you do it tomorrow, the same results happen. If you do it in India or if you do it in Sri Lanka, the same results happen. So there is high degree of certainty with regard to generalizations in sciences. So you bring in this notion of probability. All generalizations are therefore probabilistic generalizations. In sciences, you may be able to say that there's 100% likelihood of an event occurring. But all probabilistic generalizations are also statistical generalizations. Okay. So the probability of an event occurring could take place, could be in the order of maybe 0.1 to 1. Okay, maybe 1%, 0.01 to 1. All right. So you can position within this range. You could say that the probability of this event occurring is maybe 0.5 or 0.6. And in some sciences like economics and so on, the probability is higher. Maybe, for example, the law of demand and supply, law of diminishing returns, and all those, some of those laws may have a higher probability, not reaching 1, but maybe reaching 0.7 or 0.6 or something like that. Whereas people have voted for a party in a particular way this year, and then the probability of people voting in the next year's election, if you try to calculate the probability, certainly the probability will be much lower. So all generalizations in social science are probabilistic generalizations, and all probabilistic generalizations are statistical generalizations. Now, statistical generalizations range from 0.01 to all the way up to 1. So within which you can actually position your generalizations if you are going to use the positivist or the empirical quantitative kind of method in your study. There's also another term called causal. Now you have to make a distinction between cause effect. What is the connection? Which is the cause behind the occurrence of an event? Cause effect relationship. This should not be confused with the word casual. If you just make a small movement of one alphabet there, then sometimes you say I start with a causal hypothesis, and then if you have not written your causal properly, it may end up as a casual hypothesis, which is in case somebody reads it, you get an altogether different meaning. Okay. So these are some terms about which you need to be, quite familiar in research. Also, these terms like induction and deduction, then quantitative, qualitative, and a mix of this quantitative and qualitative, known these days as mixed methods of mixed approach. Okay. And then the language, as I said earlier, the language of social sciences is slightly different from ordinary language, conversational language, or even journalistic language. If you are writing in social sciences, and then if you are, there's some problem in the sense that I find people who are coming to the field of social sciences from English literature. In English literature, they are used to using flourishes in their language. Flourishes means, you use certain ornamental words to improve the readability and also to use expressions like fantastic, wonderful, gorgeous, and all that. These kind of expressions are not common in social science research. So very often your supervising teacher will mark all these adjectives and say that you have to remove it. Now, if there is a very strong relationship between two variables, two factors, then you could mention it. But then not use flourishes, not use adjectives. This is okay in creative writing in language, and when you are writing something in literature or you are doing research in the field of literature, this may be okay, but then in social sciences you have to be careful about such uses of language. Now, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of all this research, but I'll just say a few more things and then I will conclude. Now, for the first thing, when you actually think about doing research is to go for a research question. What is it that you want to study? You ask yourself this question. By doing this study, what do I intend to achieve? Now, there are three types of research questions. One is a descriptive type of research question. Say, for example, now coming to a political science field of, a question in the area of political science. Now, what percent of the population would vote for LDF or UDF in the next election in Kerala? Okay. And then this is a question that is there in your mind, and this is a kind of descriptive question. And you just want to find out what percentage would do that, just that, nothing more than that. Then you have a relational kind of question. Relational means where you are actually trying to establish connections between two events, a relational question. So, a relational question, the connection between two variables rather. If I phrase it like this, what proportion of males and females say that they would vote for either the UDF or LDF? Say, for example, if 60% of women, they say that they would vote for LDF rather than UDF. Or the other way around, 60% say that they would vote for UDF rather than LDF. So that means you may conclude that there is a connection between gender and voting pattern. So this is the relationship. Gender influences the voting pattern in the next election. You will say that. Okay. This is what you wanted to explore. Is there a connection between gender and voting pattern? And the third one is a causal kind of question. So whether a particular thing has caused something else. For example, before the election, there's a lot of advertising about the government's achievements. Okay. Whether this advertising, political advertising, as you may call it, contributed to the success of the LDF or not. Now, if it contributed to the success, so which means you may have to leave other variables aside. So you have to keep them in control and then look at this particular variable and come to the conclusion that political advertisement really led to this, or political advertisement was not the cause of the success of LDF. So there are three ways of formulating research questions. Okay. And then if you're going to do your research in a qualitative manner or a quantitative manner, most of the students in the field of economics and sociology and social work, education, of course, sociology, and in commerce also, they would go for quantitative research techniques. But in the field of business and so on, sometimes people would like to find out whether they have any preferences with regard to certain their likes and dislikes, certain attitudes that they have. Those things cannot be easily gauged through quantitative data. For that, you have to employ qualitative methods, people's preferences for a particular kind of food and all those kinds of things. And why do they say that they prefer this food? These cannot be reduced to numbers. If they can be reduced to numbers, then only quantitative techniques are appropriate. If they cannot be reduced to numbers, then you would go for description. Description could be a thick kind of description. So it is here that you have to make a distinction between methodology and method. Sometimes people have a lot of confusion about these two terms. And very often people think that methodology, methods, when you write your research methods, the methodology part is taken care of. That is actually a misnomer. Methodology, you have to think about your methodology first. The methods actually derive from the methodology. Methodology could be described as the philosophy behind a study. It is the rationale of the study. So instead of thinking about the methods that I will use in my study, you have to think about your methodology. A methodology will automatically suggest to you a number of methods available at your command, and then you employ the one that is most appropriate, or a combination of one or two methods. They are like tools. So the methodology is the basic philosophy or this kind of assumptions around which you actually formulate your research. So if I am actually going to look at the maybe the cultural, the way in which people belonging to a particular culture behave, say for example, what is their food habit, how do they actually, what sort of cultural practices do they have, what sort of economy do they have, what are their attitudes towards life and economic progress, then I would adopt maybe an ethnographic methodology. Now, as part of ethnographic methodology, naturally, you would use observational techniques. You could use sometimes focus group techniques, and so on and so forth. Now, I will end it by discussing a major issue that very often students face in research. The first thing that a researcher has to think of is identifying a topic for research. This is a big problem because very often I find that students come and they don't have any topic in their mind, and tentatively they may ask you to suggest a topic and then get themselves registered. And this is something which is not a good thing. Instead, you should identify a topic after finding a research gap. Research is not reinventing the wheel. It's not saying or rehashing existing knowledge and then you write out a report and then you submit it. Of late, for example, many people have been doing research on Kudumbasri. And you'll see that if you look at the theses submitted in universities in Kerala, Kudumbasri is, for those who are from outside Kerala, Kudumbasri is a network of women's self-help groups supported by the government and working primarily based in village panchayats, and sometimes, of course, they also interface with block panchayats as well. So it's a very extensive network, and which has actually, to a great extent, transformed our rural life. So I found that several people had submitted theses, and this identification of this particular topic was not based on a research gap. When I did my research in international relations, I actually was halfway through my research. Then I heard that on the same topic, a gentleman had submitted his thesis. I tracked down this fellow. I went, and then the thesis was submitted, and he was gracious enough to show me his thesis. Of course, the thesis had not been adjudicated, and it was still in the process, and he could have refused to show me, but then he was gracious enough to allow me to glance through the thesis. So I was grateful to him. So we had the same topic. So what I did was I made a theoretical twist to my study. His study was on SARC, SARC, and this study was, of course, in the mid 80s. Of course, the SARC was created, and then the study was, proposed. The proposal came 2 or 3 years after that. So, because I didn't want to repeat what he said. So repetition or reinventing the wheel. Now, this is something which should be avoided. How do you actually identify a research gap? And this is also one of the reasons why sometimes research journals don't entertain your paper, because you are saying the same things that other people have said, and then you have not said anything new. And they can easily identify that this is not based on any research gap. And this is also one of the reasons why examiners reject theses. Okay. Research gap justifies why you need to undertake a study like this. Sometimes at the end of research, people say that these are some other areas for exploration, and not much work has been done in this field. So you may pick up your research topic from those threads of information. So your research should be able to fill this research gap. Research objectives are often, sometimes people think that research objectives, if I've written down the objectives, these objectives would qualify for research gap. No, there's a whole world of difference between research objectives and research gap. How do you identify this research gap? First of all, I want to say that you have to be very passionate about your research. If you are not passionate about your research, you won't have the necessary perseverance to take it through the maybe 3-year or 4-year period. And I can tell you one experience that I had. I suggested after, I don't suggest any topic to any one of the students, but after considerable amount of pressure, I suggested a very simple topic to a student. And the student, of course, completed the work, but then I realized that I should not have suggested, because the student was not sufficiently passionate about it. So you need to have, sometimes you see, it so happens that you have to get a PhD. Getting this PhD is the reason why you do research. That I think is not the right approach. Okay, getting a PhD is a derivative of your research, but then that's not the reason. That should not become the reason. You have to develop a passion for that subject, and then whenever you are able to, read some material, some new material, you read it with the same kind of passion. So then only you will be able to remain steadfast in your research and enjoy your research. Otherwise, it becomes a matter of boredom. Now, in sciences, when they find some new discovery, they experience a sense of happiness. Likewise, if you are doing some research and then materials are not available, and suddenly you find that somebody has published something and that that gives you a sense of joy, and then you read it. So this is something which I think every researcher should focus on. So in order to research, to identify the research gap, you need to read the literature, recent articles published relating to your area, broad area that you have in your mind. Then you know that what has been done in this field and what has not been done in this field. So you identify an area which is a virgin area, and then take it up. And then, as I said earlier, you have to be very keen on doing that research, that kind of research. Otherwise, you may stop your research halfway, leave without a degree, and you would not have done justice to the topic that you have taken, if you are very half-hearted about the topic. Okay, I mean, these are some thoughts that I want to share with you, and then we still have some time for questions. I look forward to your questions and comments and observations. And in a session like this, it's not the resource person alone who contributes to, the generation of new ideas, and it's also you who participate in it, who have a very key role to play in this process. I will end it there. Thank you. So you can actually raise your questions in the chat box. I don't see anyone in any questions in the chat box. You could also ask questions.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable words and time. It was educative and informative one has enlightened the mind of participants. Once again, thank you, sir. Now, it is the time for interaction. If any participants have any doubts or queries, you can either mute your microphone and ask, or you can type in the chat box. If anyone have doubts or queries, please.
You can feel free to raise your question. Kindly unmute your microphone and raise your questions to our resource person.
I must say that language is not a barrier, which means you can raise questions not only in English, but also perhaps in Malayalam. And even Hindi is okay.
Sir, one doubt, sir.
Yes.
So actually, the quality of research in the social science, what is the actual situation of the quality of research, sir?
Well, you see, I must say that the quality in social science has come down. If you take the big picture, but then there are some exceptions. I find two tendencies existing in the kind of research that is going on in this country, and I am particularly focusing on the young scholars. Okay, you see some young scholars seizing the opportunity and then publishing in really good journals. The opportunity means I told you about the knowledge gap that existed between the developed countries and poor countries. That has disappeared. So they make use of all the literature and do their research properly, and then they are able to submit and publish their research articles maybe at the very young age of maybe late 20s and early 30s. I published my first international article, in an international journal, at the age of 40. At the age of 40. But these days, I find that many young people are able to do it maybe at the age of 30 or 32. So this is early 30s and so on, which is actually a progressive thing. But if you look at the bulk of the articles published, the quality has actually deteriorated. Take for instance, the UGC has made it mandatory that every PhD student who submits his or her thesis should publish an article in a journal, a refereed journal, and they listed a number of journals. And what we see in these journals is that you submit many of these journals. There are some reasonably good journals, but there are also some journals who would ask from you some money and then take your article. There is no proper review system, and they publish it overnight, and they are open, online journals. So the proliferation of what you call predatory journals has led to a very fast decline of the quality of research. Refereeing system, is not there. There has to be a proper refereeing system. And once you have a proper refereeing system and the articles, even if you fast track this refereeing process, it would take at least 2-3 months. At least 2-3 months to publish articles. And most of the articles, so I am a journal editor, so and the journal has been listed in the UGC website as multidisciplinary. So we get all sorts of articles. Unfortunately, we are not able to publish all sorts of articles. We have an area of focus which is on Gandhian studies, Gandhian thought, which includes Gandhian thought and Gandhi-related themes. Of course, within which peace and conflict studies, Panchayati Raj, rural development, environmental issues, alternative dispute resolution, a whole lot of things will come in. But mainstream social science disciplines concerns or literature, those topics do not actually fall within this subject. But all disciplines can contribute. So what I found interesting is that most of the PhD scholars are asking me first, how much money needs to be paid to your journal? Then, what is the time taken for the publication? Even if we process too fast, it takes at least 6 months. We don't charge any fees. So what happens is that, and they send, if you look at the article, I sometimes see some good articles, and but then they don't fall within the scope of this journal. But sometimes if I have time, I may look at the article and point out certain deficiencies and say that, well, it doesn't qualify, but then nonetheless, I suggest that you make certain improvements like this before you send it elsewhere, okay? So I must say that the quality of the articles, research articles, and also the quality of the theses, which you find in many universities, it has come down very, very, very steeply, I must say, the quality. So, despite the fact that we have a UGC journal list and all that, still some Trojan horses can, find an entry in the list. And very often we actually dilute many of these rigorous kind of procedures which we have laid down for various purposes. And this kind of dilution has impacted our research. So unfortunately, therefore, our social science is still in a very underdeveloped stage. And individual scholars and all that, but then we don't qualify, we don't, come up to the necessary standards which the international social science community expects from us. There are exceptions, as I said earlier, but on the whole, the quality has come down, and there are several reasons for that. One is language reason. Second one is methodology related reason. There's absolutely poor methodological training. And thirdly, sometimes even the persons who guide them, they have not guided them properly. Now, this is a kind of spiral. They were guided possibly by somebody who was unfamiliar with methodology. So after that, they became students, and then they pass on, the so-called half-baked knowledge to the students. And sometimes the students don't consult the supervising teacher also. This is also a problem. And then they try to write something and then show it to the supervising teacher, and they say that you put my name also, and then they put the name without checking the content. Now, this is the problem. Because PhD students, their articles are accompanied by the co-author, the co-authorship of the supervising teacher. And by looking at them, you would know that the supervising teacher has not done his or her part of the, the work. So these are some of the reasons. And we don't know what is the necessary standard in the first place. What we should do is to look at certain, in our country, we have a weekly, but it's also a journal known as Economic and Political Weekly. What you should do is, and this is available, I think, in almost all the libraries in Kerala, as well as in the rest of the country as well. What you should do is, you should look at the special articles section in the Economic and Political Weekly. So every week, the weekly will carry about 3 or 4 special articles. And these special articles are written in a typical research format. And then you should set those as the standard and then try to achieve those standards. This is what I think students would. I remember I was for some time a research scholar in ISEC, Bangalore, Institute for Social and Economic Change. I didn't continue my research. After 3 months, I joined St. Joseph's College, Calicut, Devagiri. I worked there for 5 years, and then I moved to Mahatma Gandhi University. So I remember there was a discussion in those days, it was in the early 80s, and the young scholars used to say that if you have published one article means the article in the special article section in EPW, then you qualify to become an assistant professor in a university. Okay, so this was a kind of informal standard set by the ISEC research scholars at that point in time, mind you, that point in time. So over the years, what has happened? The standards set actually has been diluted significantly. And this is not something which is specific to Kerala or anything like that. I find that this is found throughout the country, this decline in standards. And even with NEP, I don't know. NEP will put in place a number of things, but then ultimately this has to be worked by people, individuals and all that. So at the ground level, things are actually relaxed, and so this is I'm glad that you raised this question.
Sir,
Hello, good evening, sir.
Okay, carry on.
Sir, I have a question regarding the UGC CAS journals. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, very much.
Okay. Some of the, that means while publishing certain journals are genuine journals, then in the long time, they become the cloned journals. Why this happen in the UGC CAS list, sir?
And you see, this is a problem in the sense that this is an unethical practice on the part of those who are managing the journal producers, whoever it is. They are, say, they call themselves maybe a quarterly or something like that. And if they are, that's a quarterly journal. Say, for example, you are going to have the first quarter, you would say that volume 10, quarter 1, which is a number or issue 1. But then you may bring out maybe issue 1A, issue 1B, issue 1C, like that, charging some fees from the research scholars and then trying to exploit them. Well, this is something which I think the UGC should parallelly initiate a kind of procedure by which these so-called clones and then multiplication of issues in order to generate some income on the part of the producers of the journal. I think that should be, such journals should be identified and they should be delisted from the care list. However hard you may try, some of these Trojan horses will find entry. They may influence some people and then get an entry. Of course, every journal included is supposed to go through a journal analysis. Journal analysis carried out by a consortium and then I think based in Pune. So they look for a number of things, like say the profile of the editor, the number of publications the editor has in journals other than standard journals, other than the journal that he or she edits, mind you. That's a good standard, of course. Or if those articles can be, those research papers can be identified through online, you don't have to provide full details. You could just mention your name and they can search and then find out your academic credentials through maybe Google Scholar or various other means. So the profile of the editor is crucial. And then you need to have a website and a number of criteria have been laid down for as part of gaining entry into the list. But then we have a tendency to dilute some of these provisions. You may include a high-profile man as an editor. Name may be there, but then that person may not have anything to do with that journal. Okay, so these are some techniques we used by some of these people. They have these tricks and all that. So no other country in the world has done an exercise like this. What the UGC has done, because they know that such an exercise has its limitations. So therefore, they have not done that. They have just said that if certain journals, for example, the IBSS, International Bibliography of Social Sciences, now any journal listed in the IBSS qualifies as a good journal according to their standard. In some other countries, if it is truly refereed, then they have no other problem. So which means the journal should carry that this is a refereed journal, and then there has to be some evidence of this, having gone through review and all that. And sometimes they write it like this: received on such and such a date, revised on such and such a day, and published on such and such a date. Okay. So which means this article was received, this was reviewed, it was not rejected, but then a revision was asked and the author revised it, resubmitted, and then finally it was okay. So yeah, so that's the that's the problem. Yeah.
Yes. Moreover, there are many journals in the field of commerce, literature, historical research, philosophy, etc. Whether we can publish in any of these journals?
Well, I think you see, if you are going to use your publications for promotions as well as to strengthen your what do you call the CV and all that, then you should search for UGC listed journals. If they are UGC listed, get them published, but then please ensure that if the article is good enough, I find that sometimes people innocently publish in some of these journals, half-baked journals. The article may be good and then it may be worthy of consideration by a decent journal, but then you are not very sure and then you somehow send it to a journal and they publish it. But then the journal has very poor reputation. So this is something which people should avoid. If you have done your research well and then your methodology is good enough, your findings and all those things are good enough, you could submit it to a good journal, get their feedback, and even if you have to do revision, and sometimes I can tell you, revision can be a time-consuming exercise on some occasions. For example, one article that I had with a co-author, it was submitted to a journal not for carrying in the research section, but for carrying as a shorter piece. Somehow it was it was sent for review, and the reviewer suggested 200 and odd had 200 and odd comments, and with those comments addressed, they said that the article can be published. And it took more than 3 months to address each of these comments. So by the time these comments were addressed, the size of the article went from 5,000 to 12,000. Then the journal said that you have to bring it down to some 8,000 or something. So we managed to bring it down some 2,500 or so. And then they actually struck off again certain portions, which actually led to a certain degree of lopsidedness in the journal. Its balance was slightly upset, but still it was published. So I want to say that it's always good to submit it to a journal which actually gives you some kind of feedback. Then only you can grow. Okay. Say, for example, when I was about 30 years or so, I submitted an article to an international journal, and the article was rejected. And but then the editor said that the article doesn't qualify as a research article, but then it qualifies as an excellent reading material for undergraduate students. So I suggest that it be published in. At that time, there was a journal meant for undergraduate students known as International Notes. So something like that. But then I couldn't catch hold of this so-called International Notes. So that remained idle. Then I took it up maybe after, but I kept a record of the reviews. So 10 or 15 years later, I updated the article. I looked at the reviews and then addressed those problems. And over the years, after 15 years, you also develop. So you are able to look at your own work and then criticize your own work and then improve your work. So I did that. So after 15 years, I sent it to what you say, a SAGE journal, a respected SAGE journal, which is in Scopus as well as in Web of Science and all that. So, and it was published. So it's always good to go for review. Send it to a peer-reviewed journal. You can always learn from that. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope there is no more doubts for it. So it's almost time for us to wind up the session. So let's invite Mr. Baijumon P, Assistant Professor in Commerce, PTM College, Perindalmanna, and he is also a research scholar in Marthoma College, Chungadara, for vote of thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, one and all. It gives me immense pleasure to deliver vote of thanks in this academic session, The Journey to Truth, Introduction to Research. It is really and informative session. As pointed out by our resource person, research is a creative process, and in the modern academic scenario, research and teaching must go hand in hand. And thank you, sir, for giving some insights about research, which is essentially useful to the budding researchers. So once again, thanks to all participants for making this session a really blessed one. Thank you, Professor M.S. John, sir, and the welcome speaker, Sanoj, sir, and my research gate, Rajiv, sir, and all other persons behind this session for making this a wonderful one. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure talking to you all and also interacting with you. Yeah, and thanks to Dr. Rajiv for bringing me to this forum. Yeah.
Sir, thank you.